Well, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to start by welcoming everybody on a Thursday evening, a smoky Thursday evening down here in the Denver metro area in the Front Range. So welcome to the meeting. We got a pretty good agenda tonight. We'll have a couple hours to discuss some issues that are ongoing with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and you'll be able to ask some questions and interface with all of our staff that we have here in the region that are helping out. And I want to go ahead and just introduce everyone. We have on the screen and Shannon Shaller's our Deputy Regional Manager. She's the newest Deputy Regional Manager for the region. She was the Senior Terrestrial Biologist and got a promotion to Deputy Regional Manager. So welcome, Shannon. We have Kristen Cannon, Deputy Regional Manager. Scott Roush, Deputy Regional Manager. Jason Clay is our Public Information Officer. Mark Lamb is our Area 1 Area Wildlife Manager. Todd Schmidt, our Area 3 Area Wildlife Manager. Jason Surface, Area 4 Area Wildlife Manager. Matt Martinez, Area 5 Area Wildlife Manager. And those numbers don't mean anything to everybody, but we basically have the metro area, Fort Collins, Brush, Fort Morgan. And we have Jeff Spohn as our Northeast Senior Aquatic Biologist. And we have our Northeast representatives, Brian Soliday and Cassie Smith. So I just want to welcome everybody again. We have a little bit of an agenda review and a meeting overview, and Kristen will be covering that here in just a minute. But I wanted to let you know we had a pretty good leftover day. Thought it went better than it has in years past, so that was a good thing. Sold quite a few licenses, but it was a little bit slower, I would say, than in years past. We were pretty much over by about 10 o'clock, 9:30 or 10 o'clock. There were a few little glitches here and there, but overall, I think it went pretty well. Jason Surface is going to give us some updates on the Cameron Peak fire and the fire-related closures. And maybe, Jason, if you can do a little bit of update on the flood recovery from the Poudre Canyon, that would be great as well. And Jeff can probably help update on that as, from the aquatic side. And then our Keep Colorado Wild Pass is moving forward, and Scott is actually heading up an internal work group to figure out how to make that thing work and implement that on our parks statewide. So as you know, that's going to be an opt-out license plate funding opportunity for our park system, which has really been needing to be helped in that regard, especially from 2020, from COVID, and getting operations money. So that'll help the park side of the agency. The wildlife side of the agency is looking pretty good with sale of hunting and fishing licenses. So we're going pretty strong there. Mark Lamb, our Area 1 Area Wildlife Manager, is going to update us on the State Wildlife Area Working Group. So those are some of the things that we've got going on. And from a weather perspective and a regional perspective, I would say that the Northeast region is actually doing pretty well from moisture standpoint and fire standpoint. At this point, we can keep our fingers crossed and hope it stays that way. But from what we're seeing from our biologists and our DWMs on the ground, things are looking pretty good for our wildlife populations out there for the fall. So I think things are optimistic. Obviously we're dealing with the COVID restriction issue, and we don't know what that's going to bring. And we're working our way through all that with the Delta variant as well as we speak. So I'm glad that I'm looking forward, I guess, to the opportunity to be able to meet with you maybe next time in person, and we'll figure out a way to make that happen. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen for a little bit more in-depth agenda review and meeting overview. So thank you.
Yeah, so as you can see on your screen, this is kind of some of the major topics that we got in advance of the meeting tonight that we thought might be either relevant to discuss and see if you had any questions on, or that we actually received from the public or from our representatives. And so as you can see, just wanted to review it. We're going to talk a little bit about wolves. Mark mentioned the fire related closures, State Wildlife Area Working Group, some license allocations and preference point, a public involvement process that's coming up. We've got some media resources for hunters and anglers, and then we've tried to reserve a large amount of time at the in this meeting for just open questions and comments that you may have. And some of those questions we got in advance, which I just thank you for any questions you submitted in advance, either through the representatives or through the registration. It's helpful to us. Sometimes we can go find answers for you, and we usually know most of the answer to most of the questions, but a lot of times it helps to be able to go research and talk to the people who may not be on the meeting who know better. So we have some of those questions sort of mixed into this and at the end as well, and we'll make sure to get those answered. For starters, though, I did want to take a minute just to point out, hang on. So to point out that, you know, the Sportsmen's Roundtable and Caucuses, this is our website, and there's going to be some links that I will post in the chat as we go. But I would also, anybody who's on the meeting tonight, I will try to email those to you as well. Let's see if that worked. Nope. Hang on. Oh, weird. And anyway, I didn't get the link there. I'll get that up in a minute. But this is just to the website for the roundtable and caucuses. And the purpose of the caucus, the regional caucuses, is to have maybe more of a localized discussion or give sportsmen and women the opportunity to communicate directly with us, ask questions, and then provide feedback that then your representatives take to the roundtable and Mark takes to the Sportspersons roundtable as ways to kind of keep communication going throughout the year for hunting and angling related issues. And so I just want to make sure we all understand why we're here tonight and sort of the background in that. And if you want to read more about it, we have this website, which I think maybe because I'm sharing my screen, it's wonky, but I will get that up there. And like I say, I can email these out ahead of time. So I also, hopefully, you know, we tried to get the word out about the meeting tonight. And I think one of the greatest ways to stay involved with issues that we have at CPW or to know about meetings like this is to sign up for our email updates. And so I'll post that link as well. But if you haven't already signed up for some of these updates, this is a great way to stay informed and stay in touch. So I just wanted to point that out. We will go back here, present again. So am I back to my slides? Everybody? Yeah, I'm seeing thumbs up. Okay, thanks. So we're gonna just start off by talking just briefly about a big topic, and that's the public process that's been ongoing for the wolf reintroduction. And there's two websites that if you want to read a little bit more about it, this first one is our website. And so that link will just take you to our website. And the one thing I want to point out on this is we've got 3 educational sessions available on YouTube if you're interested in learning about wolves in other states and some of the issues that they've faced or things they've learned or just other interesting topics. Those are available. And then the other thing to point out is the engagement website that Keystone, who is helping us run our public outreach for the wolf reintroduction. This is the website that they put together that has all sorts of ways that you can provide public comment, that you can stay informed about town halls and learn about the working groups or the advisory groups and just other information. And so I encourage you to go to this website, and I'll provide a link, but it's also linked through ours. And so back to one of the interesting things about that, is so we have, as a part of this public outreach, we're doing open houses throughout the state, several of them, and we have 4 in the Northeast region. One of them has already passed. It was Monday in Boulder, but we have 3 more coming up. And so these are open houses. And so what they are is they're a way to come interact with staff and Keystone and talk about, ask questions or provide public comment or learn more about the process. And it is exactly what it's called. It's an open house. So there's no formal presentation. You can come and go whenever you want between 5 and 8 on these dates. We have paper forms that you can fill out and provide public comment. And we also, will provide cards that have like the QR code that will link to the website I was just showing you. And so you can provide online comments as well. So we just really encourage you, as you have questions or comments, to participate in these, but just, as you know, it's not going to be a panel and, any kind of formal presentation, and then people get up and provide oral public comment. It's really just a come and go as you please, learn a little bit about where we are in the process and what we're doing, and then provide any comments you have. And you can provide the same type of comments online as well. So just to keep that in mind, and let us know if you have any questions about that. We did get a question from the public submitted ahead of time, and it was, why are we introducing wolves if there are documented numbers already in the state? And this very gigantic link I have at the bottom here actually takes us, hang on, I'm not a robot, to the statute that was approved by the voters last fall. And so, that's kind of a weighty question of why are we reintroducing wolves when we have a documented breeding pair in the state already. And so I would just say, it's worth reviewing the actual language of the legislation. You'll see there's a lot of shalls and musts in this legislation. And so as an agency, we're responding to this and fulfilling our obligations in response to this state law. And so I don't know if I've got a great answer to that question, and we can discuss it further, but just, this is what we are working on right now and trying to get public feedback on in order to develop a good plan and write a good process. So I know Jason's helping me. If you guys have any questions on that right now, happy to try to answer that. Okay, not seeing any. I will turn it over at this point to Jason Surface, the area wildlife manager up in the Fort Collins area, to talk a little bit about some possible closures or existing closures. And this link right here we'll get in the chat. And it takes you to the most current map of closures.
All right, well, thanks, Kristen, and good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Jason Surface, so I'm the AWM for Area 4, so out of the Prospect office on Fort Collins. So we cover northern Larimer County and Weld County. So obviously I have the Cameron Peak was in my backyard last year, and then of course with the rain that we got here recently over the past couple of weeks, that really impacted the Pooter. And I'm sure everybody saw it on the news. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. In terms of the Cameron Peak fire and the closures that we're seeing right now, Kristen has a map up there, and you can go to the Arapahoe Roosevelt Forest website, and Kristen, I think, just put that in the chat and pull that up yourself. And it gets updated frequently, well, as frequently as they can get out and assess things on the ground and determine when they want to open it. What I will say first and foremost is I want everybody to know that although CPW can't tell the Forest Service what lands should be open, I want everybody to know that we are having regular conversations with them. I'm in communication with the district ranger for the Arapahoe Roosevelt for the Canyon Lakes district as often as I can. And one of the big conversations we had is hunting and what will these closures look like in the fall, and what will this mean for our hunters? And they're aware of the importance of hunting. They're aware of the fact that this forest provides a great opportunity for hunting, and they really are working to provide as much access as they can this fall. So with that, looking at the map right now, you can see that Unit 19, I would say for my area, for Area 4, has probably the largest significant closure. Those things south of Highway 14, which makes sense as that's the area that was probably most impacted by the fire. So as of right now, areas like Crown Point, Comanche Peak Wilderness, Long Draw, they all are enclosures. And I will say that from the information I've gotten from the Forest Service, I think right at this point, we're pretty much looking at the Comanche Peak Wilderness and Crown Point area being closed this fall. The information that I'm getting from the Forest Service is that they just don't anticipate that opening at all in 2021. So you've got to go through the winter. And so we're looking at the earliest I would see that area opening would be next year, summer of 2022. And again, that's not a definite, that's just the earliest. As for Long Draw is a temporary closure. So if you've been looking at these maps or following some of the press releases from the Forest Service, you might be scratching your head because Long Draw was actually open about a month ago. But the city of Greeley, as everybody knows, there's a lot of water up there, a lot of water storage, and the fire impacted a lot of their water storage. So they requested from the Forest Service the ability to do something called aerial mulching, which is essentially just dropping large amounts of woody debris and mulch from helicopters into that area. And in order to do that, they had to close the area for while they were doing it, and then to get all of their equipment out that was on the ground. So I had a lot of conversations with the Forest Service over the summer about timing, and fortunately, they were able to get that done here. They wrapped it up last week. So as of right now, we anticipate that area should be open by early September, if not sooner. So that Long Draw area for our moose hunters, especially that hold those Unit 19 moose tags, that area should be open in time for September for your moose hunts. As far as some of the stuff to the north, Unit 7 and 8, they're not as significantly impacted. Obviously, you can see on that map, Laramie River Valley is completely open for the most part. There's some of that stuff around Dead Man, which is still closed. And at this point, I can't say, I can't look in a crystal ball and say whether that's going to be open or not. The Forest Service isn't telling me that yes, it will or it won't be. One of the things they're saying is that what we might see is more road closures and allowing for some foot access, with the exception of those areas like Comanche Peak and Crown Point. From my understanding on that is that's just going to be completely closed. But the hope is that we'll just see more road closures, and you'll be able to get in on some of these areas by foot. But at this point, it's just hard to tell. So I'm trying to communicate with them as much as I can, and again, just stress the importance of our hunting population and seeing that they can provide some opportunity. So hopefully this map will shrink in the next couple of weeks. It shrank quite a bit over the last month or so. So that's fingers crossed that happens. As far as the Poudre is concerned and the flooding, that was obviously with a fire like Cameron Peak that did burn so much around the Poudre and some of those watersheds up there. There was a major concern that if we had any sort of a significant rain event, that would happen. And unfortunately it did. If you follow the news, it's, there's a lot more here than just the impact to the river, to the aquatics, to the fish. There was loss of life. There's still somebody that is missing from that flood. It impacted our hatchery, the Poudre River hatchery, and fortunately staff from my area and our heavy equipment operator worked with the hatchery staff and got up there and saved a lot of those fish, actually all of the fish as far as I know. So they were able to work throughout that flood and keep the hatchery up and running and those fish safe, as well as Watson and the Bellevue hatchery that was impacted down below, down in LaPorte. So as of right now, as far as recreation on the river is concerned, the Forest Service lifted all of their recreation site closures that they had on the Poudre. However, the sheriff still does have a closure between Rustic and that Poudre River hatchery. So it's not a huge closure, but it still is in place until further notice. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with, obviously, the recovery of a missing person. So, and the sheriff hasn't said when that'll open. That's just something that, as of right now, is an indefinite closure. So again, what that will look like over the coming weeks, it's hard to predict, and a lot of it will be weather dependent as well. As far as the impacts to aquatics, and I know Jeff is on this call and can probably speak to it a lot better than I can. We did see, obviously, with that sort of an event, we did see dead fish. Jason was up there with our area aquatic biologists filming some of that we knew that would happen. What that impact looks like right now is to be determined. The one thing I will say, which is interesting, is that after that large event where we did document dead fish, we haven't had any reports of any more. Not saying that means they all survived. I'm not enough of an optimist to believe that, but they just haven't shown up anywhere. So obviously, moving forward, the Poudre River, the aquatic habitat of the Poudre River it was impacted. We knew it would be impacted by the fire, and then when you get that flooding, it was an impact. So time will tell, and our aquatics biologists and Jason's folks are going to work diligently and hard to improve that as much as they can and bring it back. But again, it's another one of those things where it's time will tell. Some things are just out of our control. So I think that's really all I have as far as updates on the forest and the Poudre. Unless there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Hi, everybody. This is Jeff Spohn, the senior aquatic biologist in the Northeast region. Jason did a really good job of explaining kind of the impacts. The nice thing about having, staff that are diligent about collecting data, we've got a really robust data set on the Poudre historically. I think it's over a 20-year span on various locations throughout the impacted and unimpacted areas so far with the Cameron Peak fire. So when conditions allow, and it's safe for us to go into the river and it's clear enough that our capture probability or our effectiveness of catching fish, we feel is pretty strong, we're going to be able to go in and really address the impacts. But right now, really, the only thing we can really say is, yeah, we did see dead fish. We saw a lot of dead fish. We saw multiple species of dead fish, even suckers. But other than that, we don't want to speculate, too much in depth on really the impacts until we can actually collect some data. So hopefully that'll happen late October, early November, and then we should be able to have some numbers for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff and Jason. I'm not seeing any questions specific to that. And of course, any of the participants are welcome to ask questions on that later down in the evening. So if you think of something. So with that, I think we can move on to Mark in sort of a state wildlife area working group update.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for taking some time to listen to us, and hopefully we give you some information that's valuable to you. My name is Mark Lamb. I'm the Area Wildlife Manager, and we cover Gilpin, Clear Creek, Park, and a good chunk of Jefferson counties. So that's Area 1. That might help you figure out where we're at. The State Wildlife Working Group. Some of you, this will probably be reviewed, but those of you who are new to this, let me just give you a little background. Probably back in about 2017, 2018, the supervisors or the AWM started talking about impacts on state wildlife areas from non-wildlife recreation. So recreational activities that were impacting mostly fishing, but also hunting and impacting wildlife itself. And we had quite a few conversations, but we were really just, I hate to admit it, but we were really just kind of kicking the can down the road. We brought it to the attention of the leadership team, and they gave us some marching orders to start coming up with some ideas or some ways to try to work through this. And so the big thing is to remember wildlife areas, the intended purpose of wildlife areas are for wildlife management, and wildlife recreation, hunting and fishing. Those are the primary purposes for those areas, and they've been purchased with sportsmen's dollars. And so we went through the arduous task of looking at all of our state wildlife areas and starting to look at what impacts are occurring. Are there some wildlife areas where there is recreation that can occur, non-wildlife recreation, and trying to come up with ideas on how do we manage that. And so the first step to the process was trying to help pay for the conservation of state wildlife areas. So back in 2020, the commission came up with the regulation that if you were going to do any kind of recreation on a state wildlife area, that you had to have either a valid hunting or a valid fishing license. And that regulation passed unanimously through the commission. And there was I won't say kickback, but there was some concern that there was some groups saying, you know, I understand hunting and fishing, but I'm not a hunter, I'm not a fisher. I'd rather have some other mechanism that I can contribute to the conservation on state wildlife areas. So we worked through the process with the area wildlife managers, and we started an external working group with about 20 members from different organizations. And we tried to come up with a way to help. And I won't bore you with the details, but we came up with what is now the State Wildlife Area Access Pass. And so now those who don't want to buy a hunting or fishing license will have to buy a State Wildlife Area Access Pass. One of the big conversations were from this external working group was, how much should it cost? And it was, I won't say it was unanimous, but it was the great majority said it should be comparable to a fishing license. So that's what the cost is. It came down to be the cost of a fishing license. And everybody thought that was equitable and fair. The problem that we're still encountering is that we still have lots of non-wildlife recreation occurring on a lot of wildlife areas. And so the next step in this process is actually looking at the regulations in Chapter 9, which is the way we manage the wildlife areas, and trying to come up with regulations that will center on management for wildlife and wildlife recreation. And we're just starting that process, and that's going to take some time. And right now, the first step has been the field staff, so the district wildlife managers, the wildlife techs, and the AWMs. We've gone through all of our wildlife areas and we've tried to categorize them into 4 different categories to try to figure out which ones are strictly for wildlife and they really can't accept or really have any kind of additional recreation, and then different phases of recreation. And so that's kind of where we're at right now with this group, or with our plan for this. The timeline, we're hoping maybe to have something as far as the regulations by the end of September, but that's pretty ambitious right now. But the whole idea is trying to get the wildlife areas back to their intended purposes, and that's for wildlife. And that should be the #1 priority. So there's a quick and dirty 2 years worth of work in about 5 minutes. So I'll try to answer any questions if you have any questions out there.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. And if you have questions, if you want to put them in the Q&A portion of your menu at the bottom, that'll help us answer those. So I'm not seeing any questions pop up.
Thanks, everybody, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, rolling right along. I just wanted to take a few minutes tonight to talk about a process that we're not entirely clear on how it's going to unfold, but this was presented to the Wildlife Commission, Parks and Wildlife Commission, and it is a process by which we are going to have public engagement to talk about license allocation and preference points. And so just putting this graphic up, it's a little busy, but what I really want to point out is a couple things that we're engaging on a public process for this. I think that, you know, at a lot of these meetings, we get questions and comments about preference points or license allocation. And so just wanted to get on the radar that this is coming up. There will be opportunities for public comment. There will be a survey likely to go out, and not everybody's going to get the survey. It's going to be a random sampling, but that survey will gauge, you know, what opinions hunters have out there on these topics. And then staff will come back with recommendations, and there will be more opportunities for public comment and potentially opportunities for stakeholder groups and focus groups to speak on this. And so I'm happy to try to answer questions. I really just want people to be aware that this is coming up, that if this is something you're passionate about, again, get on that email list, like be engaged and involved. You don't have to come or watch the commission meetings, but you can wait for your opportunity to say what's important to you and what you value and what's a priority and what your experience has been through that public comment. And that will all be given to the commission and summarized for the commission so that they can make the best decisions possible going forward. These are obviously pretty complicated topics and they impact everybody one way or the other, right? So they're important, and we'll continue to talk about them at future caucus meetings. So I wanted to kind of to start your brains thinking that this might be coming up, that if you're passionate about it, just be ready to give comment and hear what's going on. So we'll keep you updated. And like I say, I'm happy to try to answer any questions on it for right now, but really I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So not seeing any questions on that, give it a few more seconds. We can.
Hey, Kristen, Brian Soliday. So
Yeah.
You said that they need to get on an email list. And so where do they sign up? Is that like the list that you had showed us earlier, the links earlier?
Yeah, you bet. So that would be a great list to get on. And I apologize. I haven't been posting the links in the chat because I feel like then with my screen sharing that you would see me copying and pasting links, but I'll be sure to post that as soon as we get into sort of the question and answer phase. And again, I will email all of the links that I've referenced, all of the websites. I will email out to all the participants on the webinar tonight, and so that you can access that more directly. So you don't feel like you got to click in the chat or copy and paste, but you're welcome to do that as well. So yeah, thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
Okay. Did I have, and this link I will post, this is just to the memo that's kind of describing what was presented to the Parks and Wildlife Commission about what the process is going to look like. And so it's just got more information. I wonder if I can let's see if I can manage technology. Try that out. So at least you have that link. All right. Looks good. And then I've asked Jason Clay, our Public Information Officer, to talk a little bit about some of the resources that he's created and worked on for hunters as far as some of the media stuff. So I will hand it over to Jason.
Thank you, Kristen. So we've been working hard on kind of a more inclusive effort to better inform hunters and anglers of aspects that we're working on within the agency, or aspects that may help you out in the field or may inspire you to try something new or look at new areas. And one thing that we put out back at the very beginning of May was a series through YouTube, and we called it Hunting Colorado. And in that, we have all of our game wardens, all of our wildlife officers go through and explain all the details about the different GMUs that they cover. Our wildlife officers pride themselves with knowing their districts and their units better than anyone else. And it's an invaluable resource that we thought if we could have them put it on the video to kind of walk you through the different units, that would just be an invaluable tool for hunters as they begin maybe in the process of picking out where they want to put in for their draw, and then also a huge aspect as they begin the scouting. So wildlife officers in that series, they go through and they talk about a lot of the Q&As or the frequently asked questions that they get from hunters out in the field, or maybe that calls, emails that they receive. And so there's 122 videos up there. And it looks like thank you, Kristen, for putting the links in there. So that just goes to a playlist, and kind of the thing about it is, find your GMU and listen in to what the game wardens have to say for that for that one aspect. And in addition to that, I think our education section has done a really good job of also putting out some really valuable materials with their big game hunting series that is going. That's also on Colorado Parks and Wildlife's YouTube page. Additionally, we have a bunch of 101 clinics that used to be really a lot of our in-person clinics, and at the start of COVID, we shifted to a lot of virtual and taking those clinics and putting them up on YouTube, so you can find a lot of stuff there that may interest you. And then just in the work of CPW and what we do, you may find something that you enjoy following along. Maybe it's work that our biologists are doing. Maybe it's a feature of a state park, of a state wildlife area. So we have a lot of tools that we're trying to get out there to our public to show what we're working on, and also to help maybe inspire you to try something new. And one thing that we did launch this last year was our podcast, and you can subscribe to our podcast on any of the major podcast forums, and you can also find it online. So we're just trying to work hard to give you some tools to hopefully help inspire you. So that's all that I got for this section.
Great, thanks a lot, Jason. And a lot of interesting topics on that podcast. All sorts about wildlife and different parks issues we have. So that kind of wraps it up for the stuff we wanted to present or talk about ourselves that we thought might be interesting this evening. We did get some questions in advance of the meeting tonight, and so what we'll do next is try to answer those questions, and then we'll open it up for any questions or comments you all may have. So one of the questions we got was on our walk-in access program. And so this question is, it seems Colorado has lost a lot of walk-in areas over the last 5 to 10 years. Is this the case? What are the limitations to securing more walk-in access? Is it budget, lack of willing landowners, lack of program emphasis, and trying to sign up new landowners or other? And the last question, is there anything I or other concerned sportsmen and sportswomen can do to help volunteer time to Parks and Wildlife for the purpose of going door to door or to other venues to try to sign up new agreements or other? And so I did speak with our staff member who is responsible for the walk-in access program, and he said that it is true that the total number of acres over the years has gone down that are enrolled in the walk-in access program, but in fact that our number of properties has gone up. So there has been some additional opportunity there, and a lot of this can be accounted for with the CRP, which is the Conservation Reserve Program. And so where the federal Department of Agriculture pays farmers basically to leave their land in a natural state with natural cover. And a lot of our walk-in access program is CRP land. And so there was kind of a bureaucratic glitch that as properties were leaving CRP, they weren't re-enrolled. And this created a problem for us in our walk-in access program that we didn't have the same amount of CRP to re-enroll in walk-in access. And so that's what accounted for some of that. To the second question, the biggest limitation has been finding decent habitat to lease. Some of that goes back to the lack of CRP, but also just if we're going to spend Sportspersons dollars on getting access to property, we want there to be, some habitat that is huntable. And so that's one of the biggest limitations that he finds. And as to the third question, is there anything I or other concerned sportsmen and women can do? And his advice, it's not so much about getting willing landowners, because we work with Pheasants Forever. We have great connections and relationships with landowners out there that want to be a part of this program. But mostly he just recommended that you get involved with the federal farm bill and make sure that there's funding for CRP. And of course, that's easy to say, get involved with a federal process like that. But if anybody on the call or in general is interested in learning more about that and talking with Ed Gorman, who is our coordinator more, I can put you in touch with him and we can answer that question more thoroughly. And so I do want to take a minute to see if Todd or anybody else on the call has anything to add to that.
Hey, Kristen, I'll jump in there. Sure. It's a great question, and I got to spend some time out in Holyoke the other day and see some of the properties enrolled in walk-in. And I guess what I'd like to add for a way to get involved in helping promote access and habitat projects is local chapters of Pheasants Forever do a great job of partnering with us, like Kristen said, and the NRCS to work on a program called Corners for Conservation. And that program also helps landowners take corners on their property and seed them for natural vegetation. But rolled into that program is also access for hunters. And so if you're out east hunting and you see the Corners for Conservation sign, that's a partnership that we have been lucky enough to be involved with with Pheasants Forever and NRCS. So that's modeled off of the CRP program that Kristen was talking about, but has also helped us add willing landowners to that program, and then also create great habitat for pollinators, upland birds, big game wildlife, and then provide a lot of public access. But yeah, I guess I just want to give a shout out to those local partners, and then also things like Pheasants Forever and attending those banquets and supporting them, because they in turn help secure public access.
Thanks for that context.
Hey, Kristen, do you mind if I chime in?
Yes, please.
Sorry, I would have jumped in earlier, but I fat-fingered getting my microphone off. Hey, everybody, my name is Todd Schmidt. I'm the Area Wildlife Manager out of Brush. And I just want to reiterate the Farm Bill. We ebb and flow out here on the Eastern Plains on private property. Our wildlife make a home there, live their life there. And we are fortunate through Ed's walk-in access programs to be able to recreate there. But when the Farm Bill goes through its cycle, the federal government decides how much money to put into the CRP program, Conservation Reserve Program. And that allows farmers to really put magnificent habitat out there on the landscape. And so I'd again talk to our senators and certainly encourage them to be very involved in the Farm Bill, because it's important to us on the Eastern Plains. It's important to our landowners. It's really important to our wildlife. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. All right. Moving on. We had some questions come in about the big game draw. And so these are kind of separate questions. So maybe I'll take them one at a time. And anybody on the panel, feel free to interrupt me and add at any time. So it doesn't have to come from me, but will the big game draw ever go back to fronting the money for tags during the application process, at least for the big 3 species? And so just as quick background, if anyone's not familiar, it used to be you wrote the check, we cashed the check, and then if you didn't get the license, we wrote you a check for the refund, or we gave you the license and kept your money. And so, talking with our license lead for the agency, the likelihood that we'll go back to how we had it before is not high. It cost us a lot of money to actually issue checks for all those hunters getting refunds. And it costs a lot of money even to refund it, through a credit card system. But I think what she was saying is it's possible, and we're looking into having some kind of hold on the money. So you pay the money up front and then you get the money back if you don't draw the license. And not sure how possible this is, but it is being explored, and hoping that this will help reduce the number of failure to pays, which is what's happening now. So somebody applies for a license, is awarded the license, and then when we go to charge their card, they have insufficient funds, or the expiration date is changed, or some other way they aren't able to pay for it. And as much as we try to give them emails, reminders, phone calls to pay for the license, if it doesn't get paid for by a certain date, then it gets put on the secondary draw list and then put on the leftover list. And so hopefully it would limit that if we were able to do something similar where you paid up front and then got something equivalent to a refund if you didn't draw. And it would also hopefully limit the number of applications, because as probably all of you are well aware, our system got overrun with big game applications this year. And so, that might limit some of the, it's easy if you just pay the $7 fee to put in and then figure out later if you really want it or not. And so I think maybe it would help limit that. So that's my answer to that first question. The second question is, will there be any change to the second draw process in terms of youths getting priority, even if only one tag for the unit is available? And I'm actually going to combine this with that last question of, it seems like elk hunting is trending in the direction of limited entry tags only. What is CPW's 5-10-year plan for over-the-counter elk hunting statewide? So these last two questions really go to the heart of the public process and the 5-year season structure, and a lot of what we do to interact with hunters, because we can manage the wildlife and we can say how much harvest a population can sustain, but how we issue the licenses and affect that harvest, we work with hunters and the public to determine. And so as an instance with this youth, the youth preference in the second draw is in response to what we've heard from the public in the past, that it's important for them, for youth to have opportunity to hunt. And so this is one way staff and the commission work together to designate a way that youth would have additional opportunity and get additional preference to draw licenses in that secondary draw and get preference. And so of course that can change in the future in response to what the hunters and the public want. But that is directly in response to public feedback. And the last one is, we are looking at all sorts of stuff when it comes to licensing and how we license and how we affect harvest. And so we do the 5-year season structure, which the next one is up in 2025, I believe. Is that right, Shannon? Yeah. And so every 5 years, we kind of take a look at how long our seasons are, when our seasons are in the year, and just sort of, again, how we know what harvest we may need, but how we affect that harvest and how we issue licenses in order to get that harvest, and what the public wants, more opportunity or less opportunity and less crowding, or, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And so we don't necessarily have a plan for the next 5 to 10 years other than continue public engagement and try to respond to that. Continue to manage the herds for healthy populations, but the nuts and bolts of it leave to the commission, leave to the public, and try to figure out the best way to go forward. And some of that is the allocation and preference points process I spoke of earlier. So that's just this is a great forum to be engaged on that. If over-the-counter licenses are important to you, or you think there's too much crowding during the rifle seasons, let us know and participate in these processes. And we do try to create that opportunity and make sure that we respond to that. So I don't know if those are quite specific answers, but I guess the answer to the second one is there's no change in the immediate future, not to say that there won't be change at some point if that's what's best. And the last one is we don't necessarily have a 5 to 10 year plan for over-the-counter elk statewide. We look at that a lot of times unit by unit through the public process. So, and then a relevant question just came in, and I'll answer that, but does anybody on the panel have anything they want to add to what I just said? Okay.
Kristen, I'll jump in with a little bit.
Sure.
I think you made great points about, get involved if you have, feedback as it relates to over-the-counter hunting. We're managing toward population objectives and sustainable, healthy populations, like Kristen said. And the 5-year season structure is an opportunity to address management on a statewide level. And then from a DAU or where you hunt, your group of GMUs where you hunt, we do those herd management plans every 10 years. And that is an opportunity where you can provide feedback on how you'd like those herds managed, which could include a change to or from over-the-counter elk hunting. And it's come up a bunch, it's on the minds of a lot of people across the state. And the places where we've made changes from over-the-counter to limited have had either a biological reason or a social reason to make those changes outside of season structure or the herd management plan process, and related to either low populations performing poorly in those areas, and they need the ability to control specifically their antlerless harvests. And so they have gone through the process with the commission to go to limited licensing, or there's the opportunity from a crowding perspective to nominate GMUs from a over-the-counter to limited perspective. But there's still quite a few units that have over-the-counter in the state, and it's probably not any surprise, but that's a great opportunity for a lot of people who miss out on the draw. We had people who couldn't get licenses on the draw who picked up an over-the-counter. So it does provide a great opportunity outside of that process and for non-residents to still be able to hunt even when limited doesn't work out for them. But yeah, Kristen outlined those public processes to make changes, but there's nothing specific on a statewide level to make any changes for over-the-counter elk hunting. Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. So the question that is in the chat is, does CPW have any plans to change software providers for the draw? The sports people deserve something better. So yeah, we've had lots of glitches and issues with the draw and applications, and we are currently in a year where we have it out for bid to potentially go with a different vendor. And so we're trying to outline our needs and, issues we'd like resolved and so forth. And so that is ongoing right now, that we may end up with a different vendor. And that process, just under state spending rules, gets reevaluated every so often. And so it'll be an opportunity to see if there's a better company out there that can still meet the needs of what we need to accomplish. Okay, so we had a question too about boating. So why is there a lack of enforcement of prohibited vessel operation? That's a statute. And basically that boats need to be, vessels need to be 150 feet away from people fishing on shore. And it creates confrontations when boats are too close, especially when they damage or remove tackle from the anglers on shore. And so let me get back to it so I can read it verbatim. There should be a zero tolerance policy of watercraft users interfering with those fishing from shore. It is just a matter of time before a confrontation turns violent, and none of us wants that to ever happen. Losing tackle or damaged tackle due to the carelessness of someone in a non-motorized or motorized watercraft is costing sportsmen money, and a lot of anglers are fed up with it. CPW seriously needs to address this ongoing problem before something bad happens. And so I would say, I did an informal poll with some wildlife managers and park managers on this, and it does seem to be an issue at a lot of our parks and other bodies of water, where we've got paddle boaters or motor boaters getting too close to shore where people are fishing and damaging tackle. And I think, this person is correct that a majority of the time we try to solve this through education, advising the boaters that they're too close and asking them to move away. I heard from a lot of park managers that they will issue citations if someone loses their tackle or has their gear in any other way damaged. Sometimes you can imagine that 150 feet is relative and hard to measure when you're standing on shore. And so a lot of times if a boat's getting too close, we do just warn them. And so unless any of the other panelists have anything to add to this, I just would say that it's on the radar. And of course, we don't want people to get into confrontations with one another, whether it's over this issue or, picnicking too close together, or hikers walking through where you want to hunt, or, mountain bikers where you want to walk your dog, and so forth. We don't want any recreation users to get into confrontations, especially dangerous ones. And so a lot of this is about, having patience and utilizing the law enforcement officers if they're there, and working with, your fellow recreationists. And so the only thing else I would add to this is just say that this is on our radar. I let park managers know, and we'll continue to try to solve this issue. So hopefully, I don't know if that's as satisfactory an answer, but just that your comments are noted, and that we don't want this type of confrontation, and we do want anglers from shore to be able to fish without any type of boater coming and interfering with that. Oh, that might be it. Okay, so that looks like our last submitted question. I am going to stop sharing my screen, and then that's going to take me a minute. So now we're really going to open it up to you folks that are here tonight. If you've got a question, if you'd like to make a comment, we've got a couple different ways we can do this. You can raise your hand, I believe you can do that, or chat us, either way. And we can actually bring you on and let you just make your comment yourself or ask your question yourself. Or if you would prefer, you can put it in the Q&A portion, and we will read it and try to answer it that way. If you put it in the chat, like has happened, we can always try to answer that as well, but it's a little easier in the Q&A. And so as we dive into this, we just, we have time, and do ask your question and make your comments, but just understand there might be other people wanting to make comments as well. So we want to be cognizant of anyone else who's got a question or a comment. And Mark, did you have anything to say before we dive into this section?
No, that's all right. I was gonna answer Rhonda Dern's questions live.
Okay, sure. Do you? I will go for it.
Okay. The first one is, how are you educating the public that wolves are as a keystone species should never be hunted as a game species? And so what we do have is a very robust website, and we've got several webinars that we've done with experts in other states that have been through wolf reintroductions, and we are relying heavily on their expertise, as well as the technical advisory group and the sportsman advisory group that are going to be providing information to the Parks and Wildlife Commission to make a decision on how wolves are managed. So I think it would be predeterminational, I should say, to make any guesses on how wolves will or won't be managed on the landscape. And I think our plan is to let those working groups let this process play out. We were mandated by the statute and by the will of the public to reintroduce wolves and develop a plan by December 31st of 2023 to do so. And so we're working that through that process. So that is why we're having the public meetings and the open houses as forum, and doing those statewide to get the feedback from folks out on the landscape that are wanting to come in and provide information to us. So that's how we're educating the public. So we through our process with the open houses and the public meetings, and then also our webinars and on our website. And if anybody else has anything to add to that on the panel, please jump in and mention that. So the second question, what are you doing to be transparent with the public about the Ramatsky incident? And then how can we trust CPW to protect wolves when they are reintroduced? The first question is a personnel issue, and we are not going to get into that in the public forum. I know that there have been newspaper articles, we've all seen them, but we have a mission to do to manage all of Colorado's wildlife, and we will do that, and we have been doing that. We've been doing that for 125 years, and I think a very high level and professional management style, and protecting the wildlife of the state is definitely a part of our mission. And as I said before, we are the state agency that's mandated for wildlife management in the state and the public, and we do hold the public trust when it comes to wildlife management. And so we will continue to do that with this particular species as well. That's another species on the ground that we will all be able to deal with here in just a few years. We've got obviously wolves on the ground right now in Colorado. So that's how I'm going to answer those two questions. We're not going to say anything about any personnel issues.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Kristen, we had one that came in through YouTube, and it was from Deborah. It's related on the law enforcement side, so any of our panelists can chime in. But her question relates to some other states that have raised the fines for poachers. She had mentioned that some out-of-state hunters were risking whether or not they got caught because the fines were less than the non-resident tags. So she just simply asked, here in Colorado, will we be increasing fines for poaching activities?
Sure. So, I mean, poaching can encompass a variety of violations, right? So anything from failure to comply with the provisions of a license all the way up to, illegal possession of a trophy-sized animal or an endangered species. And so I would say, our regulations, we did increase the fines on last year or the year before. And so those doubled essentially for some of the minor violations, the regulations that the Parks and Wildlife Commission can change on a year-to-year basis. A lot of our other violations are in state statute, and the fines for those would actually have to be changed by the state legislature. And so we do participate in years we'll advocate that a fine gets changed or increased through the state legislature, through state statute, and that happens from time to time. But that's how that process works. So for the more serious violations like illegal possession or illegal take, that's done through the state legislature. And the other thing I would say to that is that I and other panelists can speak on this, is that with many hunters, it's, sometimes if you're coming out here and spending several $1,000s on a hunt, if you're from out of state, the fines maybe don't reach a significant level, but what is important is the points. And so whenever somebody is found guilty of a wildlife violation, they have points assessed against their hunting and fishing privileges. And they get, if they get 20 or more points against their hunting and fishing privileges in a 5-year period, then they're eligible to have their hunting and fishing license suspended and not just Colorado, but in a compact of states that I believe we're up to like 46, 47 states right now. I mean, nearly all states respect this compact, and they can have their hunting license suspended for any number of years across all of these states. And that seems to be much more of a deterrent sometimes than fines. And so that is still quite the hammer, if you will, that I think is fairly effective. But I don't know if some of the AWMs, if you've got more to add on that, or Mark, as far as increasing fines for some of these violations.
Well, I would just say, Kristen, thank you. And it was a great explanation. I think I would say that we recently went through that process with the legislature, and they passed a bill that did, in fact, increase some of those fines and got them more in line with where they should be relative to the seriousness of the violations and the cost of the license. So we did work through that process in the last couple of years with the legislature.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, any other questions to submit through the Q&A, or if you would like to make a comment verbally, we can bring you on. All right, well, we'll give it a few more minutes. I can find something to talk about just in case you've got a question. What I will say is, for these caucuses, they're really, they're just a chance to hear from hunters and anglers and get your questions and give you information. And so a lot of times we find things to talk about, and we fill the 2 hours almost entirely with topics that with information we want to convey. And this go around, we decided to take more time to see if there were questions from the public. And so it's whatever participants and your regional representatives want it to be. And so we did put together a few questions for polling. And so if we don't have any additional questions or comments at this time, we can put that poll out there. And if you have time, to answer those questions for us and just kind of give us feedback. Most of them are on the caucus and what you would like to see, especially if going back to in-person would be preferable, and if that's a great way to get more participation. But also there's one question in there, and I'll just preface it that we're working on, some, we're always, whether it's walk-in access or ranching for wildlife or anything, we're always trying to find opportunities to get more access for hunters. And so I do have one question in there about hunting on private property, which seems a little out of place compared to the rest, but this isn't obviously a scientific poll, and I wouldn't sweat it too much. And if you don't want to answer it or any of the questions, that's fine. But just another way to get feedback in this setting, this forum, and give you an opportunity to provide us with opinions. So Jason, if you're not seeing any other questions on YouTube, then we can probably launch that poll and see how we do. And I will send you all the links of everything we've discussed after the meeting, and just really everyone who is on the Zoom meeting, I should say. I don't necessarily have emails for people on YouTube, but of course you're welcome to contact us, and I can even, and we can get those to you. I think you can get Jason Clay's email and he can get you in touch with me. So there it is up. If you would like to answer those questions, it would really help inform us. And just feel free to contact us anytime about the caucus or the roundtable or anything in general.
Hey, Kristen, while participants are taking the poll, can I raise a different point about walk-in access?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that is important to talk about in regards to walk-in access, something that CPW has been working on the last several years, is to increase our public access program through the State Land Board. And so we've been working diligently over the last 2 to 3 years, to increase our state trust land properties. And specifically out here on the Eastern Plains, I know that we've added, just here in Area 3, we cover the 6 Northeast counties. We've probably gotten pretty close to about 80,000 acres that we've added as walk-in access for hunters. It starts September 1st. You can access those properties through the end of February, and they're really great for small game, big game opportunities. And just like any other property, you're going to want to go there and do some scouting and check it out. But we're working hard to get some new properties online for folks, designated parking lots, access and entry points, so that you can get out there and have some more opportunities. So not exactly walk-in access as you're familiar with, but it's still hunting opportunities here on the plains and around the state.
Thank you, Todd. We did have another question that rolled in through YouTube. And Mark Lamb, this may be one that you could tackle relating to our SWA pass. So The question is, with the new hiker fee, the state wildlife area pass, will you have a naturalist available for our fee? Is a question.
As far as having somebody on scene at a state wildlife area for questions or something like that, no. The management of the wildlife areas really aren't going to change very much. We're not planning to start constructing bathrooms, trails. We're not intending to do anything different than trying to manage what we have right now with the increased use that we're seeing on the wildlife areas. So unfortunately, as far as having a naturalist there, no, not at this point. So I don't know, did that answer the question, Jason?
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Okay.
When I retire, I plan to be a traveling naturalist, so I'm available for hire to do that. I don't know when that's going to happen, but
Okay, I'll keep your number.
okay, all right, sounds good. I would like to talk a little bit about recreation in our region, recreation and wildlife interface. It's a huge issue for us in Colorado, and especially in the Front Range. And I already mentioned the park system that, during COVID, the governor was encouraging people to get outside, and they came to our parks and our state wildlife areas in great numbers. And we saw a lot of novice people that were out there recreating. And unfortunately, last year we had a record number of drownings on Colorado waters because of, I think, people that were novice and didn't know how to recreate around water. We're not familiar with what to do when storms come up to get off the water. And in many cases, we're not wearing personal flotation devices. And they're not required to be worn unless you're, I think, 12 or under. Scott can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But a lot of people just have them or didn't have them on stand-up paddle boards and got knocked off a paddle board and couldn't get back to it and unfortunately succumbed to the water. So we deal with a lot of issues relative to recreation in our region. We've got probably 4 million people that live in the region. So we have the majority of the people in Colorado. We have a large proportion, I would say, of visitors to Colorado that come here from the east. People come into DIA, or they're coming from the east, or even some from the west to come over on the Front Range, Rocky Mountain National Park, and many of the other beautiful areas that we have, and they want to see it all, they want to do it all. So the folks on this call that you see on your screen and our park rangers and park staff and our area wildlife managers, district wildlife managers, and property technicians deal with a lot of issues relative to recreation. Scott has he had the biking and trails program. It's now under Shannon in the region. And so we have a lot of collaborative processes going on up and down the Front Range with Forest Service, not so much with the BLM because we don't have as many BLM properties on our Front Range in the region here, but our county and city open spaces are partners as well. So we're working through trying to do large scale and long-term planning for forest management health to protect wildlife habitat and to allow for recreation. And so we have a state trails program that has a grant funding process, and folks can submit grant applications for trail maintenance, for new trail development, and it can be motorized and non-motorized. And so we work through the wildlife comments from our wildlife managers statewide on those processes, and then the State Trails Committee and the subcommittees work through the grant funding and prioritize those projects for funding. And so that's how the trail projects happen in Colorado. And Director Prenslow had come up with an idea about regional recreational roundtables. And so we actually are funding partnerships, local partnerships through each region, of which there are 4 in Colorado for our geographic, administrative regions. And so we're providing funding to those partners to develop planning for recreation and wildlife and transportation and all those kinds of issues that we're all dealing with on the Front Range and elsewhere in Colorado as well. But I think nowhere does it come to a head more than in our particular region. And I hear people complain about restrictive regulations on properties, and you have to pay to do this and you have to pay to do that, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and you got to have a reservation for this. Well, I'll tell you what, 30 years ago, you didn't have to do that on the Front Range. But now with the visitation and the resource degradation that's taken place, it's made it necessary for us to implement some of these regulations and restrictions and take a more hands-on approach to our wildlife management and our park management. And that's how, because of the increased visitation and the increased utility costs and increased overhead and operations costs, that we have to ask for more money from our user groups. As you know, we don't get very much state general fund money at all in our agency. We're mostly funded as an enterprise agency through the sale of passes, licenses, and registrations. We do get some GOCO funding for some of our capital projects and those kinds of things. But so we have to be fairly hands-on with the regulatory process. But I know this is sort of a rambling deal. I didn't have any notes for it, but I just wanted you to know kind of what we deal with recreation and wildlife. And so we're heavily involved in those processes. The folks that are on this call and our field staff and office staff are diligently working to try to continue to provide those resources for you. So with that, I'll sign off here for a second.
Thank you, Mark. We've had switching gears just to field some more questions. This one coming in through YouTube as well. Asking about the need for more game wardens, and the question relates to anglers taking over their bag limits, or specifically mentioned here is bass anglers taken under the minimum size length. And so the question is, can we have a waterway cleanup, and specifically talking about the South Platte River through Denver?
Let's ask Matt Martinez and Jeff to kind of weigh into that. Matt, why don't you give a little bit of an overview on a typical DWM workload in your area, in Area 5 in the Denver metro area, and what your folks have to deal with and respond to, and what percentage of time they get to spend doing actually law enforcement?
You bet. Thank you. Matt Martinez. I'm the Area 5 area wildlife manager. My area encompasses the 6-county metro area. So I have the South Platte River, going through Denver. Typical day for a game warden can start at, 12 a.m. in the morning, and can go, hot and heavy all through the day. We typically deal with just about every wildlife issue that comes up in the cities and the surrounding areas. My folks are the experts in wildlife management. So the agencies, the cities, the counties, and the residents generally look to us to answer questions or handle issues with wildlife. So I would say that law enforcement is definitely one of the bigger things that is important to us. But you kind of got to weigh that against the time and the other issues that are going on in the counties and the cities and up on the forest and stuff like that. So I would say that the game wardens, the district wildlife managers would want to spend more time doing law enforcement, but usually that's the one thing that can be put on the back burner for issues that directly involve residents and citizens and counties and other agencies. So typically the day of the game warden is going from one issue to another across the 6 counties, trying to provide good public service to the people that live in those counties. Yes, definitely we could use, more district managers to help handle the workload. And for me, I have 10 district managers that work in that 6-county kind of metro area, and they're spread pretty thin. We are on call. Somebody in my area is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we split that between the 10 officers as well. So from that aspect, we can't be everywhere where we'd like to be. We do understand that there are issues going on, on the river or in the lakes or in the forest. And we're just trying to do the best we can with the time that we have. So maybe Jeff can answer some of the questions on South Platte and water issues.
Sure. Mark, did you want to jump in or you want me to go?
I'll go ahead, Jeff, and then I'll give just a brief overview on how positions are approved through the process,
Sure.
through the legislature.
Sure. As far as the fishing regulations, whether it's the bag and possession or minimum size or slot limits, typically that's based off of, the biological parameters or the capacity of the system to grow fish by certain species. And, one thing that, the public, I always try to, remind or educate the public is, especially on the aquatic side of stuff, we're population managers. So if we see population impacts because of, like Matt alluded to, water delivery, over bag, over harvest, things like that, that's typically when we'll change a regulation. We typically don't change a regulation just because we see a couple of fish that may not meet a size requirement or something like that. We're population managers. And with that said, we can put any kind of regulation in play. And, as alluded to, we are short-staffed when it comes to law enforcement perspective. No matter what regulation we put in place, if, the honest people are going to be honest, and the people that are going to want to cheat the system are going to cheat the system if we're not there. So that's something to consider moving forward. And as far as a river cleanup, the South Platte has got so many different, property owners and whatnot. If, you're interested in, spearheading something like that, or at least getting the ball rolling, I would contact the Greenway Foundation. They're a nonprofit organization that's kind of the South Platte River stewards in downtown Denver. And they've got the capacity to pull a bunch of people together to pull something like that off.
And tell Mr. Shoemaker we sent you. I want to briefly talk about how we come up with the number of employees that we have. And so we're a state agency, obviously, and I said earlier we're an enterprise agency, so we're cash funded through our own budgeting process. So I'm a member of the division leadership team, and every year we make budgetary decisions based on our budget request to the legislature through the long bill. And most times, any new personnel or employees, FTEs that are added to the division have to be approved by the legislature. And so we're very cognizant of the fact that, we need to continue to do our jobs the best we can with the employees that we have. But when we have the opportunities to ask for specific needed positions, we do that. And to that end, this year, just in this region, we were able to successfully, we're not quite through with the process yet, but I asked for a couple new district wildlife managers and one property technician for the region. So we can't just add positions as we want to. We can hire temporaries for maintenance work and temporaries for law enforcement on our park system through our operating budgets. But when it comes to permanent FTEs with law enforcement commissions, those need to be approved through the leadership team, through the budgeting process, and then through the legislature. I hope that that helps a little bit.
We got one more here on YouTube. And the question is there a mandatory distance for hunting on wildlife management areas with traps or firearms?
So I've been talking a lot tonight, so I was going to see if anybody else wanted to hop in on this, but I'm on YouTube now too, and it seems like the question asker lives close to a state wildlife area, and so I would say it just kind of depends on the property and the type of hunting. So if there's a safety issue in regards to a specific wildlife area, definitely recommend giving our office a call and getting in touch with the local officer, the technician, and seeing if we can't solve that safety issue. A lot of times when we have properties that about private property or roads, we'll have safe shooting zones or tell hunters to shoot in one direction. It is illegal to shoot across a road or from a road. It is illegal to hunt in a careless manner. It is illegal to hunt waterfowl in the many of the Front Range counties within 150 feet of a dwelling. So we do have some rules like that we use as tools to help enforce safety. And if there's a specific issue with a specific property, we can try and work on that and make sure that hunters are behaving in a safe way. But hopefully that answers the question. Oh, distance from the edge of the property. There's not a law or a regulation that says you have to be so far from the edge of a property, but you do have to have permission for the property that you're on to hunt. And the projectile, so your bullet or your arrow, can't go onto a neighboring property. It has to stay on the property for which either the public property that you're on or the property that you have permission to hunt on. So there's no distance from the edge of a property, but you do need to, you can't enter private property that you don't have permission to be on, whether, physically or with a projectile. Oh, near Muller State Park. So the question asker is saying she lives near Muller State Park. And so I would get in touch with that park and that park manager and see if they can't help address some of those concerns. Just hunting, being on an adjacent property is not in and of itself dangerous, but if there's something that hunters are doing or some way that the property is configured that is leading to an unsafe situation, potentially there's remedies or there's ways we can work with you on that.
I think the park manager at Mueller's Mitch Martin, isn't it? No, he's a deputy now. Who's the park manager?
I believe it's Brian Kerrigan.
Brian
As
Kerrigan.
a Brian?
Yep.
Oh, there
Okay.
you go.
Yeah, call Brian.
Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions or comments, that's really all we had for you this evening. It seems like we can come prepared to talk for the full 2 hours, or we can leave it up to participants. So you can kind of see the results there on the on our poll, and it looks like people like it when we kind of come prepared to talk about relevant stuff. So we'll get some good topics going for next time, and make sure to keep you informed, especially about all the ways in which you can publicly participate and inform those, whether it's DAU, the herd management plans or the licenses or anything to that effect. We'll be sure to keep those issues, bringing them up and keep you informed, and then give you any other information, and definitely take the opportunity as we have these meetings to give us topics ahead of time or questions that you're interested in, and we can come prepared to talk about those things as well. So we just really appreciate everybody being on the meeting tonight and watching on YouTube. And thank you so much for being a part of this and for supporting wildlife and wildlife management in Colorado. Mark, did you have anything to, did we have another question? Hang on. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Appreciate that. So,
Kristen, can I make a quick comment?
You bet, Brian. Absolutely. Go for it.
Sure, thanks. So one of the questions was, what's your biggest obstacle? And seems like the biggest one was people are uncomfortable asking for permission. So I was talking with Pepper Canterbury a couple weeks ago at the Hunt Fest up at Shields. And I've been really successful in being able to secure private land for the youth hunters that I like to take out. So in one unit, I have actually 30 square miles, about 7 different properties just by knocking on doors. So she's going to put together a workshop and ask me to speak and do some role playing to try to teach people how to go about it and what to do so that they're not so worried about going up and knocking on the door and hear the word no.
Thanks, Brian. That's great. That's great to know. And maybe we can come back at the next caucus and talk a little bit more about that and maybe provide some additional information and opportunities there. So I appreciate that.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I think it's so important for us to interface with you all. We work for you, and we're protecting your park and wildlife resources out there. So it's important for us to kind of know what you're thinking and check in with you, make sure we're on the right course. And we sure try to do that. So thank you again for being here. We appreciate your valuable time. I want to thank the participants on the screen here for your expertise and for the presentations. And Kristen, thanks for running the meeting. That's been great. And hope you all have